Okay, good morning, everyone that's here today. So, we're gonna get started on our. I'm sorry to say this is our final lab session together. I know. Um, that's why I put here. Reminder: this is our last class. So, it was really nice to be your TA for this whole semester. We had some great ups and downs and some intense projects and assignments to do, but we're here. Thanks for being here. Today is not very uh, essential, but if you are trying to break through this specific topic, this will be the class for you. So, without further ado, we are going to be talking about lighting for your final diorama pieces, specifically within Unity. I won't be covering how to do lighting in other 3D applications such as Sketchfab or Blender, just because this is probably also what you'd use for your school projects as well. So I feel this makes sense. So lighting makes or breaks your diorama or your scene or whatever it is within Unity. Uh, the way you light your scene matters an awful lot. What good is it spending so much time on a detailed project just for your lighting to not fully showcase your work, right? Lighting is what brings even mediocre work to a professional level, right? This is a simple block out scene that I created to demonstrate how lighting can make any scene look good, even something as simple as a bunch of white cubes and spheres and planes, right? So the goal of today is, if you would like, I provided in Canvas on week 11, I provided a Unity package that has a scene with this little project here, as well as the textures that will go with the the models in here. Just a little something that we can start making our lighting on, so that you can learn how to make proper lighting for your scene, right? And then these skills can then transfer into your actual diorama pieces, right? So we can capture a lot of different moods from lighting. The lighting in our scene, we can use the exact same models, and the way that we light them, shade them, add post processing dramatically changes the feel of what we're going for, right? So this is a cool example I found on ArtStation or on Pinterest. Just a sample scene that someone drew, and then they had a bunch of different art styles and color theming on top of that same composition, and you can see that the results feel dramatically different from one another, right? My favorite's probably in the middle left. I like that little sun peeping through near the top. It's just very dramatic, right? But this is a way to show that colors and lighting makes a very big difference with the mood of your scene. And it's easier than you think to make good lighting, right? And I'll show you that there is this one tab on Unity where you would do most of your lighting tweaks to your models, to your scenes, and that is going to be here. If you look in the window tab of Unity at the top left, actually before I even get to that, I'd recommend you all to just open a Unity project you would want to work on this in. I am personally opening just a Unity 6 project, just because Unity 6 is the most up to date, and it's you'll still be able to find the same windows and same tabs, but I find that Unity 6 just has the most up to date lighting features and rendering and whatnot. So what I'm going to do is what I already did actually was I went to window rendering lighting, and you can see that this will open up this drop down here called the lighting tab. So lighting is very essential for your projects. I like to kind of drag it. It's going to be just plopped in the middle of your view. I like to put it right beside inspector right here, because I find that just works for me. Your inspector is whenever you click on something in your scene, it's going to pop up there. So the lighting tab is just right beside it, right? And I guess we can quickly just I can quickly explain what all these options here are so first of all, we have our scene tab. This is pretty much just where you do all of your baking of your light maps. Very simple, very straightforward. We'll get into this shortly. There is a lot of settings here. However, most of the time your bakes will be fine with just the default settings, minus a few things we can switch up. And second, I believe this will only be on Unity 6, is adaptive probe volumes. This is very technical. This is not what we'll be talking about today. But this is just a way to specify where you want more of your light map bakes to be prioritized. If you have a very intense area of your scene that you want the lighting to be most prominent, then you would have those probes more set there or more prioritized there. So that we won't worry about this tab here. Environment is a very important tab. This is where your scene's lighting is tweaked at a very global level. So we have the environment tab, which is pretty much your skybox, your sunlight, your shadows, environment lighting, reflections, and then we have other settings here, which I'll talk about very briefly at the end, which is simply we have fog. And fog is a cool thing that adds some depth to our scene and whatnot. And then we have real-time light maps and baked light maps. These are the results of your scene bakes, right? So pretty straightforward. Main things you need to remember are scene and environment. Those are the two we'll use. All right, so what I'm going to do first, so Unity lighting, we're going to be talking about lighting tools. So before we even get to this, what I recommend you all to do if you want to participate, which you don't have to, but if you're here, it might as well. You will go to your homepage on our course, and then if you go to week 11, you will see tutorial 11 lighting Unity package. That will have the default scene that I've created for us. Very small size, don't worry about it. And now we have this Unity package, and you can just simply drag it, and I believe you can just drop it in. Yeah, I just drop it into my assets and import everything listed here. Right. So once again, I downloaded the tutorial 11 lighting Unity package on the week 11 of our courses. And then you could also right click in your project view and then import package, custom package. And that's how you can get this package that I created for y'all into the Unity project right here. You would just click on that. And so now I do have a lot of stuff already in this project, but you'll notice the first under assets, you'll see M1 tutorials. You can just click through that until you find the scene. And if you open that scene, then you can view your model like such. Now, mine's looking a little different right now because this project has some post-processing that I made earlier for different projects. So I'm just going to turn that off real quick. There we go. There it is. Okay, there we go. So your scene should look something like this, if I'm not mistaken. If it's not fully dark like this, that's okay. It means that there is a reflection probe automatically baked by default in your scene. But the main thing is that you have this flat looking scene here. And this is where we're going to start just kind of creating our lighting. So let's see, where's the shadow? One second. I'm noticing I'm not really seeing a shadow casted onto my models right now. And I'm not sure why. Hmm. Is it this one? Yes. So- they're working perfectly for you? Huh, that's weird. I don't know why I can't see shadows. It might be because I've already done stuff in this project. There might be something wrong with just this Unity project itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly make a new Unity 6 project. But this might take a while, so just bear with me. And I always recommend Universal 3D, right? You're always going to be usually using this anyway. Just because this unlocks all of your different lighting tools right out of the box. Oops. New folder. There we go. So I'm just gonna let that open. Might take a little bit. And in the meantime, what we can do is we can talk about the different lighting tools that Unity provides by default. So in most engines, you will run into these four primary light sources. So starting with light objects, we have our directional light, point light, spotlight, area light. So I'll go through each one really briefly. Starting off, we have our directional light. This is the main source of light for your scene. It's pretty straightforward. Usually perceived as sunlight or moonlight, and it's very powerful on its own. Most of my projects honestly just use this as its only light source, and by default it looks pretty meh. But then if you know how to manipulate the lighting in your scene, this sunlight can then become a very powerful tool. Also included if you use baking and everything, it can look very realistic or very stylized depending on what kind of vibe you're going for. And you can see on the left here, this is the window for that. And then here we have the scene with the sunlight working. And if you notice, actually every single light source, they all are technically the same object. And if you change the type, if you see right here, the type can be changed to different ones, such as the point light or the spotlight, and it will keep the same object, but then just change it to the different type of light source. So we also have the point light. Point lights are pretty nice. They're very smooth, very soft casting. They're very good for smaller light sources, such as torches or lamps, fire, things that have a kind of a spread in all directions. And these are great for that reason. We have the spotlight. Spotlights are very directional. It's like a cone that gets projected. They are very dramatic light sources, very strong. They're they're useful, but not as common as point lights or point lights or direction lights. And they're very fun to see the shadow cast from them. It's just very prominent, very flashy. And then finally, we have the area light, which I wasn't able to demonstrate because it involves baking lights only. It's only baked, so you can't really see it in real time. These are not very common, and personally, I would usually just use a emission map instead because it has pretty much the same effect, which I'll showcase in a little bit. And yeah, those are the main 4 lights. Let me just check if my Unity project's open. It's not yet. Almost. So next up, we have our skyboxes and reflection probes. Skyboxes and reflection probes add lighting, ambient lighting to our models. And you can see here that our skyboxes are materials. They're not some random other thing in your Unity project. If you make a new material, you can then go to the top and then search for a different shader, and then you can find skybox, and then there are 4 options by default. I would usually do procedural just because you can just set lighting or set the colors within Unity, and then it changes based on where the sunlight is. But then things like the 6-sided, cube map, panoramic use textures that you can then place as the skybox, and those are pretty fun too, but they're more static if I'm not mistaken. So the skybox and environment tab, once again, you can make a new skybox material, which I'll showcase to you once my project is loaded. It's one more package to install. And then this can change the overall lighting of the sky. And this affects directly how reflection probes work, which I'll explain those in a moment. And you can see here that you just drag and drop the skybox material into this skybox material tab in our lighting environment tab, and then that will be used for baking, for reflections, etc. And as well, we have our reflection probes. Reflection probes go hand in hand with the skybox because it pretty much is a 360-degree screenshot from where you put the reflection probe. And so this is very useful for making accurate reflections of your environment. You can use multiple of these if you like. Usually I would use one for a diorama. These are very good for ambient lighting with 0 performance cost added if you bake them, right? Baking's one click and then you have a baked light map or baked reflection probe. There is a real-time mode which has its use cases, but most of the time you would not be using that because that is more expensive on your performance. Say it again? I will showcase to you once I am able to demonstrate it, once this opens. We're going to be kind of making a little lit scene here once I can get this new project open. All right, there we go. So what I'm going to do, now it's a fresh scene, nothing is causing any issues with my lighting. I'm going to import a new asset or a new package, custom package. Once again, it's going to be that tutorial 11 lighting package I gave you on Canvas. Import. Now it's in here. I'm going to click through. And 1 second, it will load. There we go. So now it's looking the way it should. We have our very strong shadows, as you can see. But from what I notice here, this doesn't look very Oops, let me move that to the side. Collapse. This doesn't look very realistic. It looks kind of ugly, right? You have very solid contrast between the dark and the brighter values here. So the first thing I would do personally is start with that sunlight, which I already kind of put it for you. So there you go. You can just leave that as is. By default, this will be baking for us once we start doing our bakes and whatnot. So we don't really have to touch it for now. If anything, you can set it to baked here just to ensure that it's going to bake properly. But that's only once we get to baking the sunlight. So right now I'm just going to leave that as real time. The first thing we're going to do is create a new material. I'm going to call this skybox. Right? So by default, that's just going to be a regular object mesh material that you can apply to objects, but we're not going to be doing that. We're going to click on up here in the shader, type skybox, and you would see these options here. I would recommend the procedural one because this one, we don't have to use textures to manipulate it. We can just change it within here, right? So if I start changing these options here, you're going to notice that nothing really happens yet because we did not apply this texture to the environment tab, right? So what I'm going to do is this lighting tab that I opened earlier, once again, it's found under window and then rendering, lighting. So if you go into that lighting tab, go to environment, drag and drop this new skybox material onto this skybox material tab. And you'll see right away that it's going to change to that new one that we added. Right? Yep.
I believe you can also just drag it into the empty void.
Yeah, you can literally just drag it into the void as well. Yeah. And if you want to know what happens when you drag into the void, it ends up here, right? So that's where it gets applied to, right here. And we can also add our directional light. If we drag and drop that directional light into our sun source, it's going to be right there, right? So these are good to place in our environment tab because that's going to let our baker know that these are what they're going to use primarily to bake the lights in our scene. So that's set. That's good. And so now we want to fix this really ugly dark void, right? We can't see what's happening. So we're going to click on game object up here, the top left, go to light, and we'll see those 4 different light objects we talked about earlier. We're going to go to this 5th option here, reflection probe. We're going to place that in. This is from my experience, it's very underrated, but it's probably one of the most useful lighting techniques to get your scene looking much, much better without doing any work, right? So reflection probes are, as I explained earlier, are for ambient lighting, right? It captures the world as you'll see we're about to do, and then you're able to see that within certain reflective materials or textures. So to set this up, we're going to go back to our inspector tab. There are these 2 options here in the reflection probe. This first one allows us to adjust the bounds of our reflection probe. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of manipulate this over the entire box here, like so. Right? And then the second option will allow us to separately move the orb itself, which I'm going to just plant it right here. I think this is a good spot. It's kind of, you want it sort of in the center of your scene. to capture the most of the atmosphere around it. And so now we have a reflection probe in the scene. And the way the reflection probe works, I already set it to static. Your meshes that you're baking the reflection probe with need to be set to static. Static is pretty much anything that doesn't move in your scene will be set to static by default. You should always be setting things in your scene to static. It's good for performance, it's good for lighting. And so you'll notice now, if you go into our probe again, we have some settings. And we can leave it as baked. Do not put real time, that's just going to be expensive. The importance and intensity can remain 1. Box projection is more of a technical thing. We don't really need to worry about it, but that just kind of, it's more realistic, but at the cost of, it only works in smaller spaces. Blend distance normal, and everything else we can leave as is. We're just gonna click bake. And you'll see right away, a lot brighter, a lot more something you'd expect to see. Like this already looks much nicer, right? You can see what's happening inside. You can see that there's actually these meshes right here, these spheres. Oh, 1 second. Unity's just doing its thing. Here we go. That was weird. Huh. I don't know why we're baking global illumination. Okay. So for me, I don't know why it started happening. It started to bake global illumination. You'll see at the bottom right, it might appear. If that happens, you can just disable it for now or cancel it, because it might start laying your computer out. So you can see here, we have our baked reflections. For some reason, you notice these spheres, these shiny spheres, they're shiny, but they're not reflecting as they should. They're only reflecting the skybox in its entirety. We should be seeing that the reflection probe captures the world and then it relays it onto these models. I don't know why it's not showing. Maybe if we look at the reflection probe itself, we'll see what's going on. So if I click on it, odd. I think one thing we can try to do, if you're also having the same issue as me where it's not really working the way it should, go to the lighting tab here and then click new under lighting settings, right? So this will create a new lighting settings object. This just is pretty much a bunch of parameters are stored within this lighting object. You can name this lighting. And I think what's going on right now is it's starting to just try to bake a light map for us, even though we don't really want it to do yet. I'm just going to create this and then set our light mapping settings to progressive GPU, because we don't want to bake things on our CPU. That takes way too long. It's not meant, our CPU is not meant to bake things like this. So I'm saying that progressive GPU. And I'm going to set my real-time lighting on, like so. Right, so new light map setting, real-time lighting on, light mapping settings, progressive GPU. I'm just gonna leave that as is. And I'm gonna go back to my inspector, to the reflection probe. And I should click, if I click bake now, it will process the global illumination with the GPU now. So it's not going to be super slow like it was, right? So it's Baking is always a finicky thing. There's always things I don't fully understand about it. I don't know why it had me have to bake the globe illumination first, but here we are. So that made one of my steps missed, right? Because what's supposed to happen is we're supposed to bake the reflection probe first, and then you can see here on this orb, you can see the surrounding environment around it captured in this little object here, which then is relayed onto these meshes in the back. So that can lead right into what we were just talking about, which is our global illumination in real time versus baked lighting. This is where we start getting really nice results with our lighting in our scene. This is a giant tab of stuff that seems scary, and it's definitely a little stressful to look at first. The main thing is we don't really need to touch most of those settings. As I demonstrated, you're just setting the GPU, progressive GPU instead of CPU. And then we're going to start by testing out real time, right? So I also want to set my light map parameter to default high resolution, just because we have such a small scene that we can wait a little longer for it to load. Say it again? Yes, so now we're going to click bake, generate lighting within our scene tab. So it's going to do its thing. And now it should be taking a little longer than it was before, because now it's actually baking all the lighting. So it's taking all those different rays that come from the sun that bounce around this room, boom, 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 boom. And then you see a cool like illumination, such as this lighter spot on the roof or some light around this mesh here. It's going to look a lot better in a second, I'm pretty sure. And I'll talk about what's happening on the right over here in a second. That's a pretty fun little thing that happens with baking. Or on the left, sorry, over here. And that's the thing, baking takes time. You have to wait around for it. Yours is finished? Nice. How's it look? You turn.
Basically the exact same. Okay.
It was much faster on my large desktop at home. That's for sure. And sometimes if you keep baking too quickly, you might crash your GPU within the, like it won't crash your computer, but it might just stop working within Unity. So you'll have to restart Unity. The GPU would just stop baking. So keep that in mind. There we go. All right. So it's for a more trained eye. I mean, you can probably even see it like especially, but you can see there's a lot more stuff happening, a lot more information captured within the scene than there was before, right? So if I go back to the older original screenshots, you'll see in this screenshot right here, this wall is very flat all around. And the roof is just kind of a dark color. There's no areas of shadows, no ambient occlusion areas, no highlighted areas. It's boring, it's flat. Here we got a lot more happening. There's this glow around this sunlight right here. There's this glow on the roof here. You'll see there's this like little darkened spot right here that the light's not hitting as much. And if I go over here, this is really cool. So these two planes are not light sources. They are emission maps planes. So there's this texture I made, and it has this colored emission map on it. And the coolest thing about baking lights is that emission maps count as light sources. So you can have, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So this was the example of global illumination, which really makes a difference in our scene. We have real time on the left, and then global illumination baked on the right. And so the ups and downs of both, we have a real time, which is obviously updating real time. It's good for a day-night cycle, for example. It is a little more expensive on the GPU. It's easier to make it look good, but it's harder to make it look amazing, right? And that's kind of how it is with Unreal Engine as well. They have their real-time global illumination called Lumen. Lumen is finicky, like it looks good, but it also has its limits. And so the thing with baked lighting is that it's static, so it won't be updating in real time, but it's very optimized. It's super performant because everything's baked to a texture. It's harder to tweak because you have so many more settings to go fiddle with, but it can look amazing, right? And it's probably more tuned for realistic scenes. And I'd say real time is probably better for stylized because it has a more lighter look to it.
Since we're going to like really about lights, but also be kind of like lighting also from post processing.
Yes.
Are you going to touch about that? Or?
Yes, I
Awesome.
will be.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. Good question. And so global illumination is cool. Once again, as I was talking about, emission materials are affected by global illumination. And this is a very performant way to get access to different lighting finer techniques, right? It's very fun. You can specify, like, if you want little pod lights or little trimmings that are glowing, you can add an emission map that has that glow, and you get this free lighting. You can see here, the Blender monkey is being lit from both sides, and it's all done with textures, no light sources. So this is also no extra light cost, right? And because it's real time right now, I believe if I make a new 3D sphere object, bring this in, if I go to materials and then add the emission to it, and let's say I want to bring this over here, and I'm just going to set this to medium. I don't want it to take forever again. I'm going to bake, generate lighting. So I added this emission sphere here. And you notice how nothing happens? That's because this is not set to static, right? And remember, things that you want baked in your light map should always be set to static, right? So if I set the sphere to static and then generate, you will see this orb is glowing and it's adding this little emission here. However, I can't really move it, you can see, because this is an emission, right? But something like the sun, I can drag that around and the global illumination will update in real time. That's because with light objects in the scene, I don't know exactly how they do it, but it works and it's super cool. When you set them to real time, then that global illumination can just kind of be updating as you move the sun around, right? And like, look at this. Look how moody it is now, right? And we all we did was bake the real time like earlier on, and our scene already kind of conveys so much more without having a billion light sources that take up a bunch of extra performance. And that's cool and all. But what if we want to bake things as perfectly static or as just baked and not real time at all. What we can do is then, instead of real time lighting, we can turn that off. And if I go into my directional light, I'm also going to set this to baked. If you go in their scene, there's a directional light underneath main camera. If you set that one to baked, and then if we go back to our lighting tab and then click generate lighting, also with real time off, it will now bake very accurately, but it might take a little longer. We'll see how this goes. Yeah, of course.
I was looking on the Suzanne model, and each scenario was really sharp edges on his face.
Oh, in the actual Suzanne model?
Well, in the scene here, so
Oh, in the bake?
yeah, I can like see that. Not anymore. I think the face itself
Oh.
after the thing. Sorry.
It's all good. This might take a while to bake it like this. Yeah. So I might not do real or fully baked because this might take. Oh, never mind. I have to be patient because our scene's relatively small, so it won't be too much. And let's see what the result looks like. Hopefully it's good. Oh. There you go. Okay. So now this is fully baked. And fully baked has its uses. If you'll notice, when I move the sun, nothing will change anymore. The lighting stays the exact same because it's fully baked, which means things are not supposed to move around. There is also the option for mix, which is a mixture of real time and baked. But you can see here this light, this shadow is very strong. It's very accurate. There's no pixelation as you saw earlier. And the lighting bounces. Look at this. Look how beautiful that is, by the way. Like, that's amazing. The glow from it's like super accurate compared to real time. Like real time you had much more blurriness, artifacting. Here you get super high resolution results. You can see here on Suzanne it's very nice and pretty. Yeah, that's fully baked, right? So before we touch on to post-processing, there are a few things with baking that you'll run into with your own models that you should be very aware of. So the main thing is your UV maps absolutely affect your baking and how that goes, right? So models need very cleanly laid out UVs so that when Unity starts to bake your light maps, it will have perfectly laid out UVs to then place the lighting detail onto, right? So what Unity does on its backend is if we go into our objects inspector, like our meshes inspector, I'll just show you where that is. So this little scene that I created, in the inspector under model, there's this option called generate lightmap UVs. And so what that does is it pretty much generates UVs for your object onto UV tab 2, right? And so that's very good because usually your UV1 is going to be, in my case, it's kind of a jumbled mess because I use a bunch of trim sheets, or I use a trim sheet to make it. So my UVs do not look like this, right? What Unity will do when you turn on generate lightmap UVs is it will take all those islands and then unwrap them and then just create this laid out version here, right? So that's a main issue people might have. If you'll notice, there's certain weird dark spots or light spots on your personal bakes. Make sure you set generate lightmap UVs on, and then bake lit models are set to static. right? As I mentioned earlier, right? This whole scene here is set to static so that it actually bakes. I'm just going to show you in my Blender here. The UVs for this model are just kind of very tiny, very all over the place, kind of on this color palette here. So if you just bake it like this, Unity's not going to know what to do, and it's just going to make very tiny. It's going to place them in a very tiny spot of your light map, and so they're going to be very pixelated, very washed out, right? So yeah, that's the main thing. Setting your light map UVs on, and then you get nice results like this. Because I can show you, Unity will generate this new folder here, tutorial 11 lighting. This has your light maps in it. And this is very cool to look at, actually. So you see one, there's the reflection probe. You can see right there. That's kind of the 360 captured of your environment, which is then, as you can see on this cube or these spheres right here that are shiny, you can see the world is reflected in that. And that's realistic to real life, right? And you get these really funky light maps here. This one right here will help us understand what's going on the most, I'd say. If I just pop this open here, you'll see it's kind of just taking our UVs of our model, packing into this light map here, and then just creating the lighting data onto there. You see it right here. It's kind of fun to look at, right? And you can see exactly what's happening. If you go to baked light maps, you see here, there's this baked light maps option under lighting. If you click on, let's say, the first one, it creates a viewer tab. This is a cool thing. You see the blue sections are your UV islands. And you can see that they bake onto these texture maps, right? It's so cool. You see here, this is like the little glow from that orb I placed. You can see if I change the intensity, this is just like an exposure that you can play around with to see. It won't change what it actually looks like, but I think lighting's the coolest thing, and you can just kind of play around and see what's happening. You see big directionality, the direction of the light. I don't know why there's no shadow mask available to see. UV islands, textile validity. I believe things that are red here are not visible or are occluded by other objects, so they're not counted. And because we specified for Unity to create UV maps for us, we don't have to worry about any overlapping light map UVs. And there's this second one here. If I click on it, this one has the UVs for the spheres. For the spheres and for Suzanne, right? And because we told it to auto unwrap, the UVs are going to look different than what Blender creates for us, which is good and bad because Unity doesn't have the best auto unwrapping. Most times you auto unwrap, you're going to get subpar results, right? So if you wanted to, this is a bit more of a technical thing, you would create a second UV channel. I'll showcase it as an example. You would create a second UV channel within Blender. So if you go to data here, UV maps, UV map 1 is for your textures always. If you make a second UV map, This one will always, for most applications, be for light maps. This one, you can then select it, and then if I go to my UV editor, and if I, let's say, UV pack islands, then this lighting will be used for our models, or this lighting UV map will be used for our models lighting. So you can specify what light map Unity uses if you make it yourself, which is a little more work, but this gets you much more realistic results, right? And I can show you exactly how it looks too. Let me just go all the way and actually get this fully working. Might as well. So if I select everything, I already did the unwrapping, so I won't have to worry about that. All I need to do is just set the textile density. Remember, calculate, set value, set TD, right? And then from there, I'm just gonna UV pack islands. Give it a sec. And there we go, right? This is just an example. You don't need to worry about following along. Right? And then if I brought that into Unity, then I could bake it and it'd be more realistic or more accurate. But yeah. Moving on from that, this looks great, right? So much detail already captured. However, there's one final thing that will really enhance your scenes. This is post-processing is in actually pretty much every 3D application. Sketchfab has their post-processing. Unreal definitely does. Unity definitely does. Blender has it. Post-processing is the cherry on top. You can see this is how you add it into your scene. If you go under game object to volume, volume doesn't mean sound. In this case, it means post-process volume. You're going to create a global volume like this. So I'll showcase that. So I can either right click or just click on the top here. Volume, global volume. And I could just even rename that post-processing. And it's just going to place that anywhere in the scene. It doesn't matter where it is because it's global, so it affects everything. Also, if you click on the game tab, I set the camera to face everything like so. If you want to see everything like this as you're changing the post-processing. So I'm just going to stick in this view for now. And if I go back to the inspector, while clicking on post-processing, you will see this little options here. So the first thing you would do is click new to create a new post-processing profile. This is pretty much a bunch of parameters that are then applied to the post-processing overrides. So all these tabs here, Unity has these default post-processing options. They are all useful in their specific cases, but I will only discuss the key ones that I find are most helpful for getting certain looks. So first of all, we have Bloom. Bloom is an older post-processing technique that's been around a while. It's very cool because it adds screen space glow around glowy lit objects. You can see here in these two examples on the left, there is no bloom enabled, and then on the right, there is bloom enabled. There is this bright glow around these two emission cubes or planes. And these are the settings that I added for that. So if I go back to Unity, add override, post-processing, top one is bloom. Click on that. Turn on these tabs here. And then you can then, I put the intensity to 1.5. Right? But you're more than welcome to just kind of play around with that. You see you can get super bright. And then if you change the threshold, it changes the glow of everything. I find this looks very 2000s. If I turn down the threshold, everything looks very washed out and hazy. It makes me think of like Skyrim or something when it's like this. But I'm gonna put it at probably 0. Maybe 0.72 or something, and then intensity 1.5. Right, so we have some very visible glow around this orb here that I placed, see? And then some glow around these planes. And a bit of glow around the edges of this building here, right? So, that's Bloom. Bloom's very fun. Bloom adds a bit of extra atmosphere to your renders. And if it's not for you already, make sure in main camera, post-processing is on. There's this little option here. Make sure that's on. And you'll see the post-processing working. So next, we can add an override again. And this time I want to add, let me go back to my slides, tone mapping. So tone mapping is very useful. In Unity 6, it's already gonna have neutral on by default, but I'm gonna show you what it looks like with it off versus on. There is also the third option called Aces. Aces is a little funky. It's very dynamic, and it looks very dark when I don't think it should be. I would not recommend Aces because it's considered industry standard, but it's kind of outdated and dark looking. So if you go down to tone mapping, create or turn it on, there's none, neutral, and Aces. You see how dark Aces is? It's cool. It works if you want it to, but I don't like it. It's a little too dark for me for what I kind of go for. And the main thing is that you don't get good control over anything but toggling on or off. Like there's no percentage slider or anything. So I don't like it. Neutral is what Unity is Unity 6 is by default. And if I turn it to none, this is what it looks like without any tone mapping, and everything looks very weird. Like with the bloom, it kind of just makes everything look very white and gross. So keep it on neutral, and it will even out the colors nicely. Or Aces if you like that. Right?
I think for Aces you might need to more dark red.
Yeah. And then what I'm going to do next is kind of in that boat where instead of using Aces to do it for me, I'm kind of going to tweak the different values. This is kind of like how you would tweak images in different photo editing softwares where you change the balance of certain white values or shadows, midtones, highlights, etc. This what I'm doing next is the white balance. So what I like is if I turn up the white balance to 25 for temperature and 10 for tint, I get this light orangey reddish color compared to over here. It's a little more blue, which is fine, but I like to kind of give it more warmth, you know? So I'm gonna just replicate that in here. If I go back to my game view and I add an override, post-processing, there is at the very bottom, white balance. Add that. And then if you turn on these two toggles, you can then change the temperature. So you can get very cold, very blue, very warm. It's always good. Good rule of thumb is never do extremes for this. Only sort of do very subtle changes. And see, tint will also change the color as well. If you very subtly change it, it's not as noticeable, but it makes a very nice difference. And so I like how warm that looks, right? That's just for my preference. I like this. I find Unity has a very cold, artificial look by default, so giving it some warmer colors makes it look nice and nice. No, yeah, I'm not, definitely not. This is very warm and cozy, right? But it depends on your theme for your game, right? Or your diorama piece. If you're making like a very cold tundra, you would probably want to make it bluer and more like the opposite way, like this. It makes a big difference when you change it this way. Like, see, that looks a little more artificial and sort of cold and grim. And then this is much more warm and comforting. Right? So that's white balance, which I like using. The shadows, midtones, highlights is also very good because this allows you to control the 3 distinct levels of lighting in your scene with very nice accuracy. So obviously shadows are anything dark within a certain threshold. Midtones are anything in between, like gray values, and then highlights are anything very white. I'm not very, I don't know the exact way to describe these things. I'm not technical as much like that. But I understand that these make a nice difference if you do them properly. And the first thing I was noticing was how dark it was in here, at least when I was doing it at home. So I wanted to increase the light values of the shadows and increase the blueness, because having blue in shadows always adds a nice, very stylized look, right? And then a little bit of red in the midtones, I find. Very little, because we already added some red in the white balance. Makes a nice little difference. And then a bit of yellow for the highlights. And so if you remember that, blue, I'll just showcase here, a bit of blue in the shadows. If you hold shift and then drag, it'll move very little. A little bit of red, very little red in the midtones, because midtones are very sensitive. And then some yellow in the highlights, very little. And I can also tweak the brightness of the shadows if I want, very little. I'm gonna do it very little, because I want my scene to feel bright and inviting. And you know what? This post-processing, or this balloon, is very intense. I don't like how bright it is on this ball here, so I'm just gonna turn up the threshold to 0.9 and then the intensity down a little bit. You see? And so with this shadows, midtones, highlights, you can see here, I'm just kind of adding this bit of color to an otherwise black and white scene. Right? Maybe too much blue, I can just turn that back a bit. Hold shift and then drag this circle back. Right? And so you can see here, there's shadow and highlight limits. This can change the threshold of where those shadows and highlight values are. I think they're fine by default, so I'm not going to touch them. You can see now that the scene, it's just very, it has all this color now that wasn't originally there. See, like this is very blue compared to what it was before, right? And I like how that enhances the look of the scene, right? It gives it a nice feel, warmer feel, but then cooler areas where there needs to be, right? But overall, it's just more happening. Even if it's like a sub-perceptual level, there's more happening and more to kind of engage in looking at, right? Notice here, like the baking. there's like these very nice occluded shadows appearing from that baking we did earlier. Right? Very nice. And so this one's a bit of a fun one. The last post-processing I'll touch on is chromatic aberration. This is a very fun phenomenon that happens with camera lenses, where near the edges of them, the RGB channels, if I'm mistaken, they'll warp a bit, right? And it'll kind of give it this look. You can see here on the right, it has this very stylized look. It's not useful for all use cases, but for very interesting extra details, it's kind of cool. I noticed this effect happening when I'm playing on my Quest 2. Near the edges of the lenses, I have chromatic aberration that I can see a little bit. It's kind of annoying, but you know, it can happen on glasses too, I think. Can it? No. It's just, yeah. But it happens on my Quest 2 for some reason. Yeah. I think it's just the way, how focused they are on such a close object. But yeah, we're going to add that. So if I go to add override, post-processing, second one, or not second one, but chromatic aberrations right here. If I turn that on, you'll see that that effect is very prominent if I turn it up all the way. I'm going to set that up around 0.2. So now there's this like interesting effect going on near the edges of my screen, right? And there's a lot more post-processing options, but a lot of these are just different versions of the same principles, right? I don't find myself, I don't really use lift gamma gain too often. Maybe I should. I forget how this operates. Oh, it just kind of changes the different values like so. Right? You can get very funky results with these. But yeah, that's post-processing in a nutshell. This is what the final result looks like for me. And this is kind of where we got to, right? So we started at the top left. Like it's hard to tell how much you're making progress on lighting until you look back at what it looked like at the beginning and you're like, wow, this is so much more amazing than I ever thought it would be, right? You see on the top left, it's super flat and boring. It's just, you're not able to get a sense of depth the same way you get on the bottom right. You see where you have so much more dramatic contrast and dynamic lighting, right? I think mine here's it's a little different. It's more colorful, not as dark, but you see here, you get that very nice lighting look. And mind you, there was only the directional light that we used. There was no small little lights, no point lights, no spotlights. I didn't touch on those because I firmly believe that you can get absolutely incredible results with just the sunlight first, and then you can add things later on, right? Because anytime you add extra point lights or spotlights, you're increasing your bake times a lot, right? So that's the final result. And here's a bonus. This is a bit more of a technical thing. The render pipeline asset, this is what Unity uses to render your scene in URP, right? And so there are all these settings in here that your different shaders and post processes use. And you can tweak this as much as you want to enhance how your lighting looks in your scene, right? And I can show you how to access it. Under assets, you will see settings. If I believe Unity 6 has this, I don't know if other versions do, but you'll see these things here, these little things you can click on. These are the render assets. And so the one that we are using, or that is used by default, is going to be the PC RP asset right here. Sorry? The other one, mobile?
No, it's the render.
Well, the renderer and the render asset are both used together. So, no, it's all good. The renderer is like on the back end. This is what decides, okay, at a fundamental level, are we using forward plus rendering or deferred rendering, which have their uses, or forward plus? Are we using post-processing? Are we using stencil overrides? And this is where, if you notice, when you have that weird dark areas near the corners of your models, if you notice last week when our grass was having this weird dark area, under PC renderer, there's screen space ambient occlusion, which is on by default. And it looks, the way they have it in Unity is kind of ugly by default. You see here. So you can definitely just tweak this. I prefer to use interleave gradient. I don't know how much more expensive it is, but this one is much more smooth than the other one. But ambient occlusion is something that affects the corners and crevices of objects, where it adds that dark values, right? You can see here. That ambient occlusion was baked into these spheres here in the back. You can see that's technically ambient occlusion, but it's baked, right? Screen space ambient occlusion is affected on the screen. It takes the geometry itself, and based on basic certain calculations, it can determine if a corner is tight or not, and then add that darken value, right? So this feeds into the RP asset right here. And then in here is a bunch of parameters that tweak the renderer to our liking, right? So we can have things like the quality. So we can have HDR on or off. HDR will allow us to have bloom or not, which is, it's funny how that works with HDR. Render scale. In our camera, I believe, yeah. The render scale affects how pixelated the result is here. You can see. So certain games, maybe like Lethal Company or Repo, they might have the render scale turned down to something like this. Not that much, but like that, to get that pixelated look for free without having to do any post-processing or tech or shading. Is really what?
It's really functional to use trading. So I did a video about it.
I think I watched that one, yeah.
Yeah, they use actually the high pipeline, and then they just like grab everything down and bring it up.
Yeah, they do like this weird, it's so weird, but it's cool because it's like a unique look that you won't get anywhere else. Yeah, right? So this tab is great because you can find different options. If you're running into a problem like when you place a new light object, you're not getting enough lights, like some of them are flickering or something, you can turn up the object limit here. Cast shadows here is, you can turn that on or off. Because we already baked it, it's not going to change. Things like reflection probes, probe blending, box projection, shadow, different shadow attenuation distances, post-processing, etc. It's all here. And so those are accessed in, remember again, assets settings. Secondly, we have fog. Fog is found in the environment tab of lighting. this can add extra depth and atmosphere to your scenes. And it's better usually for larger spaces because you can see like the gradual fall off of it, but you can use it like Silent Hill style where you have things very tight and close to you. So that can be found in our lighting tab here. Under environment, there is fog. And so fog will add this. It's hard to see, but if I turn it on and off, you'll see it right away. It adds this haziness that you can then change the distance of, right? So you can have it like super intense. You can change the color to purple or even like a blue. I always like to go for like a slightly bluish color, right? And then you can turn it to like 0.1 or 0.01. Right? So it adds some atmosphere. And I guess since we're here, the environment tab is still very useful. Because we baked it, remember we can't really change certain parameters here, but we could probably change the environment reflections. You can see that the intensity will change. Oops. Oh, there you go. Right. And actually, here's a little fun thing I want to demonstrate. There is a really cool option in the reflection probe called box projection. Now, box projection, if I turn up, you won't see it right away because this is a very matted environment. But if I go to my materials and I turn up the reflection all the way like this, you'll see that there is this, the reflections are appearing that we baked from that probe around the environment like this. And they look good, but they're kind of static, so they're very easy to tell that it's an image. What's cool about box projection, if I go back to the reflection probe, is if I turn that on, it will, based on this box that I defined earlier, it will project that texture, 360 texture, around a box in that shape. So you can see now, I don't know why it's a little finicky in areas. Maybe I can try to bake it again. Huh. But you can see that, you can see the actual reflections much better. It's very weird, but sometimes you can get a good result. Sometimes it looks a little off. But you see, like here, you get the reflection of the window on the top and bottom. It's kind of something you would expect in real life. But then you see how I defined the box projection at the end here? It kind of has this unrealistic cutoff, which looks a little weird, you know? So if you want to fix that, what we can do is we can then go into our, we can go and stretch this box out a bit to the edges, like so. And then from here, bake. So it might make things look a little off, like so. You see, for the most part, we can get cool reflections. And this stuff is very performant. That's why we use it. Yeah. That is the lighting for today. Let me set this back to 0.1. Fun fact, 0.1 smoothness is for any matte surface where you don't want strong reflections. 0.1 will always be the most matte things are going to be in real life, because every object is going to always reflect light no matter what. That's just how, like, we don't have a perfect pure object that absorbs all light bounces, right? So if you're going to set something to super not shiny, set to 0.1. If you do 0, you can, but it will look a little less realistic. 0.1 is just kind of what you would expect in real life, or what is possible in real life. But then again, we're making games, we don't have to make it real, right? But yeah, that's our results. I'm just going to showcase that. Oh, the fog's a bit strong. Let me turn that down. Right, so that's the result. Woo. And now I give the time to you. This is the end of our nice 12, actually 11 weeks. It was so nice to meet you all, and thank you all for being here, that we're here. And if you would like, you don't have to, there is the evaluation of the TAs and the profs. If you want to fill something out, give some feedback on how I was doing, you can just put that there. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. I forget where to go to access the feedback surveys for the year profs. Yeah, hold on. I want to see if I can find it. Actually, I'll open that later. Yeah, I'm just going to show this.